My mom's husband told me I had no right to visit after she died. So when he tried to give a speech at the funeral, I handed the pastor mom's handwritten note, where she wrote, "Thank you, my child, for being by my side until the end." He didn't get a single mention. I'm Daniel, 31 male, and I can still hear the sound the ceramic made when it hit the kitchen wall, like a bone snapping. That was the first time I realized Ron, my mom's husband, 59 male, doesn't throw things to make a point. He throws them to erase one. The mug was from my childhood, blue with a chipped handle, "World's Best Mom," in bubble letters I'd written with a paint pen at a church fair. It exploded next to the calendar where my mother, Linda, 58 female, had circled her chemo dates with tiny hearts like she was scheduling brunch. Ron glared at me like I'd snuck into his house, not the one I grew up in. "You don't get to upset her," he said, trembling, voice half snarl, half pleading. "You come in, you stir her up, she can't rest. Don't you understand what rest means?" I understood. I also understood control when I saw it. Mom leaned against the door frame, one hand on her chest, eyes glassy with the meds. She never asked us to pick sides, not even after she remarried. She'd fuss about the plants and the mail and then quietly text me late at night, "You okay? Eat something." That's who she was, soft shoulders, iron spine. The woman who once worked 2 nursing shifts to buy me a used drum set. The woman who practiced saying, "Ron is trying," to make it true. Sophie, 24 female, my little sister, was in the hallway biting the sleeve of her hoodie like she used to as a kid when Dad forgot pickup. She and Ron played this brittle, polite game. He called her kiddo and kept her at arm's length with a hand on her shoulder, guiding, always guiding. He'd been in our lives for 5 years, and in that time the house went from mismatched frames and loud music to museum silence. He replaced the family portrait on the mantel with their wedding photo, his hand white-knuckled on Mom's waist. Dad's photo ended up in the hall bathroom on a shelf with spare toilet paper. That was Ron, redecorating grief. Mom kept a shoebox in her closet with handwritten notes, hospital bracelets, a clipping from my first drum recital. She'd tuck new things in there when Ron wasn't looking. I didn't know about the letter yet, but I knew she was making a little museum of the life he tried to paper over. It felt like a secret password. The day the mug shattered, Mom tried to smile and failed. "Enough," she whispered. Not to Ron, not to me. Maybe to the room itself. I picked up the shards while Ron paced, muttering about boundaries and doctor's orders, words he flung around like locks. He was always invoking a rule, always threatening to call someone, her oncologist, the hospice nurse, the pastor, anyone who might scare us off. I should have left. I didn't. I put the biggest shard in my pocket like I was holding onto a map. I told myself, I'm her son. I'll be here, even if I have to crawl. The memory of that shattered mug stayed with me for days, almost like a warning I couldn't shake. Every visit to the house after that felt like walking into a trap. Ron would circle me like a vulture, pretending to be civil if Mom was awake. But as soon as she drifted into that medicated half-sleep, his voice would drop. "She needs peace. You bring her chaos. If you really loved her, you'd leave her alone." He always used that word, chaos, like my presence was poison. But I could see the way Mom's hand tightened around mine, even when her eyes were closed. She wanted me there. That's what burned the most. Ron acting like he spoke for her, when all she had left were these fragile gestures. One evening, Sophie and I brought takeout because Mom hadn't been eating much. I unwrapped the soup, set it on a tray, and when I turned around, Ron was already at the counter pouring it down the drain. Doctor's orders, no greasy food. It was broth and rice. He slammed the pot into the sink so hard it splashed onto the tiles. Mom croaked from the couch. "Ron, please." But he just kissed the top of her head like he was the saint holding it all together. Sophie started crying in the car that night. "Why does he hate us?" she asked, voice breaking like she was 12 again. I didn't know what to say. Hate wasn't even the right word. It was ownership. Ron treated Mom like a trophy cabinet he got to curate. We were just the dusty old trinkets that didn't fit his display. The real breaking point came 2 weeks later. Mom had taken a bad turn, and the hospice nurse called to say she wanted me there. I drove over, heart pounding, only to find Ron on the porch with his arms crossed like a bouncer. She's resting. You can't go in. I tried to step around him, and he shoved me back so hard I stumbled down the first step. Sophie screamed. He snarled. This is my house, and I decide who gets in. She doesn't need you confusing her. Confusing her? She was dying. And the man blocking me from saying goodbye wasn't her husband in that moment. He was a gatekeeper to my mother's last breath. Mom must have heard the commotion because her voice, faint and cracking, carried through the window. Danny! That one word undid me. Ron spun toward the sound, cursing under his breath, but I pushed past him and bolted inside. She was lying there, eyes glassy but locked on me. I grabbed her hand, and she smiled weakly. Ron was shouting something behind me, threatening to call the police, but I tuned it out. All I could hear was Mom whispering, "Thank you, my child, for being by my side." That's when I realized she'd been keeping more than a shoebox of memories. She'd been saving her final words too, and not for him. For me. Don't forget to subscribe. After Mom's whisper that night, something shifted in me. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was defiance. She had chosen her words, her gratitude, for me. Ron could scream, shove, curse, threaten to call the cops all he wanted. He couldn't erase what she'd said. He couldn't stop what she'd written. Because 2 days later, Sophie found it. We'd been cleaning out Mom's dresser, pulling out scarves that still smelled faintly of lavender, when Sophie pulled a folded piece of stationery from under a stack of old church bulletins. She opened it slowly, like it might crumble. I'll never forget the look on her face when she read the first line. She pressed the paper to her chest and whispered, "It's for you." I took it, hands shaking. Mom's handwriting was wobbly, but still hers. Those looping L's, the slant she always teased me for inheriting. The letter was short, but it cut deeper than anything Ron could ever shout. Daniel, my child, thank you for being by my side until the end. You gave me comfort when I was afraid, laughter when I thought I'd forgotten how to smile. You are my peace. Don't let anyone tell you different. Mom. I sat on the floor and cried harder than I had the whole illness. Sophie curled up next to me, clutching my arm. It felt like Mom had thrown me a lifeline from the other side. Proof. The kind of proof you can't argue with, can't gaslight away. But Ron wasn't done trying. At the hospital, when she finally passed, he cornered us in the hallway like a man possessed. His eyes were bloodshot, his tie crooked, and he jabbed a finger at me so hard it almost touched my chest. You don't come back here. You don't visit the house. You don't belong anymore. His voice cracked, not with grief, but with rage. Sophie gasped. That's our mom. But he cut her off. My wife. He spat it like a challenge. Then, softer, but even more venomous. She's gone now, and I won't have you clinging like parasites. She was mine, not yours. It was like a switch flipped in him. Within days, he'd changed the locks. He even dumped a box of my old yearbooks and childhood photos on the curb in a trash bag. Sophie found her stuffed rabbit from when she was 6 lying in the dirt, ears soaked from rain. That broke her. She picked it up like it was a body. Ron didn't stop there. He started calling extended family, spinning his narrative. How we abandoned Mom. How we only showed up to cause drama. One cousin texted me, "Ron says you tried to fight him while she was dying?" I wanted to scream. Meanwhile, Sophie got late-night calls from blocked numbers. Heavy breathing, then hang-ups. Once, when she answered, a voice muttered, "You're not welcome anymore." I knew it was him. His brand of cruelty was too specific. That's when I made a decision. I wasn't going to fight him in the driveway. I wasn't going to trade insults on the phone. No, if Ron wanted control, I was going to take it back at the one place he thought he owned, Mom's funeral. And I had the letter. But before that day came, things got worse. Ron escalated in ways that made me realize he wasn't just bitter. He was dangerous. The weeks between Mom's passing and the funeral felt like being hunted. Ron wasn't grieving. He was patrolling, like some guard dog whose whole identity was keeping Sophie and me out. He started small. A couple of nights after the hospital, I found my car windshield spiderwebbed with a perfect fist-sized crack. No note, no witnesses. Just rage, crystallized in glass. Sophie swore she saw Ron's truck parked half a block down from her apartment one evening, headlights off. She rushed inside with her hoodie pulled tight, heart pounding. When she peeked through the blinds, the truck was gone. Then came the sabotage. Mom's old church had offered to host the reception, and I went there one morning to talk to the pastor about arrangements. The secretary looked uncomfortable as she handed me a sticky note with Ron's handwriting all over it. "Ron already stopped by," she said quietly. "He told us you and Sophie wouldn't be participating. He said, you weren't on good terms with your mother." My stomach dropped. He was erasing us before the funeral even happened. When I confronted him outside the church later that week, he exploded in front of the parking lot like a man whose mask finally slipped. "You think you're the good son?" His voice cracked high, spittle flying. "You abandoned her for years while I took care of everything. And now you want to play hero?" People walking by stopped to stare. Ron must have noticed because he suddenly went theatrical, pressing his palms together like some grieving widower on stage. "She chose me, Daniel, not you. And at her funeral, people will know who mattered." I walked away before I put him through the pavement. But inside, something hardened. He wanted ownership of her memory, but I had the truth folded in my pocket every day. The letter. Meanwhile, Sophie was unraveling. One night she called me sobbing because someone had scrawled, "Not family," on her apartment door in black marker. She didn't have to say it. We both knew whose hand had done it. I told her, "He wants us to break. He wants us silent." And then, for the first time, I told her about the plan, about the letter, about handing it to the pastor when Ron tried to take the spotlight. She stopped crying long enough to whisper, "You're really going to do it?" "Yes," I said. "He can throw mugs, lock doors, change locks, trash our photos, but he can't rewrite her words." The night before the funeral, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with Mom's letter spread out, reading it over and over. The ink had smudged where my tears fell, but her words were still there, steady as bedrock. And I knew exactly when I'd reveal them. When Ron tried to give his speech, the one he'd bragged about to half the family, the one where he'd paint himself as the lone saint, that's when the truth would cut through. I wasn't just going to show up. I was going to take her voice and make it louder than his. Don't forget to subscribe. Update 1. All right, so... Wow, I didn't expect this to blow up the way it did. When I posted about Ron smashing the mug and then barring me from seeing Mom, I figured a handful of people would tell me, "Sorry for your loss," and move on. Instead, I woke up to hundreds of comments, some heartbreaking, some hilarious, and some that honestly hit me harder than I expected. First off, thank you. A lot of you said things like, "Your mom's love is clear in her words," and "Don't let that man rewrite your history." And I can't tell you how much I needed to hear that. Because for weeks, I've been second-guessing myself. Like maybe Ron was right, maybe I was causing chaos. But seeing strangers recognize the manipulation for what it was, that gave me a spine again. Second, I laughed way too hard at the person who commented, "Ron sounds like the kind of guy who would cry if you unplugged his Wi-Fi." Accurate. Another said, "I should show up to the funeral in a shirt that says, 'Chaos Child,' in bold letters." Tempting. But here's the heavier part. Some of you warned me that men like Ron don't stop when you expose them. They escalate. That scared me, because it already feels like he's circling the drain of his own anger. A few people even said, "Don't be surprised if he tries to sabotage the funeral to center himself." That hit too close. Because guess what? He's been bragging about his speech. He even sent out a group email calling it his final tribute. The arrogance drips off the screen. And yeah, a lot of you picked up on the letter. Some suggested I frame it. Some said read it myself. But one comment stuck with me. Let her voice end his. That's when it clicked. I don't need to scream at him or throw punches or sink to his theatrics. I just need to hand her words to the pastor at the right moment. Let Mom speak. I can already hear some of you saying, "This could get messy." You're right. I don't think Ron will go quietly. If I pull this off, he's going to lose it in front of everyone. But maybe that's the point. Maybe people need to see the version of Ron that Sophie and I have been living with. Raw, unfiltered, cruel. The funeral is tomorrow. My hands are shaking even typing that. I tucked the letter in my inside jacket pocket tonight, and I swear I can feel its weight pressing against my chest, like Mom's hand on my shoulder saying, I'm still here. Next time I update, it'll be after the funeral, after Ron tries to take center stage, after Mom takes it back. The morning of the funeral, I woke up with my jaw clenched so hard it ached. I'd barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured Ron standing at the pulpit, voice dripping fake sorrow, taking Mom's memory and twisting it into a monument to himself. Sophie and I drove together, her clutching that stuffed rabbit she'd rescued from the rain. She wasn't planning to bring it, but at the last second she shoved it in her bag. She'll know I remembered, she said quietly. I didn't argue. The church was packed. Mom had been a nurse, and half the town had passed through her care at one point or another. People filled the pews, clutching tissues, murmuring condolences. But when Ron walked in, everything went quiet in that strange way it does when someone toxic enters a room. He wore a black suit that looked expensive, too new, like he'd bought it just for the performance. He strutted, nodding like a politician, squeezing shoulders as though he was the grieving widower everyone should orbit around. When he spotted us, his face twitched. Sophie reached for my hand under the pew, squeezing so hard my knuckles popped. The service started gently. The pastor spoke about compassion, about Mom's years at the hospital, about her laughter being a balm in hard times. I felt my throat close, but then I remembered why I was there. The letter in my jacket pocket burned like fire. Then it happened. The pastor said, Ron has prepared some words, and motioned toward the pulpit. Ron walked up slow, heavy, dragging out the moment. He set his papers down like a man unrolling a holy scroll. Then he looked at the crowd, sighed dramatically, and said, Linda was the love of my life. She and I, that was my moment. My heart was pounding so loud I thought everyone could hear it. I stood, walked to the aisle, and approached the pastor. My hand was trembling when I pulled the folded letter from my jacket and pressed it into his palm. I leaned close and whispered, These are her words. The pastor's eyes widened. He glanced at the letter, then at Ron. For a second, the room was suspended, like the breath before a storm. Then the pastor cleared his throat and said, Actually, before Ron continues, Linda left a note for her children. The shift in the room was electric. Ron's face went white, then red, then white again. He stepped forward, stammering, No, that's private. But the pastor was already reading aloud. Daniel, my child, thank you for being by my side until the end. Gasps echoed. People turned in their seats, looking from Ron to me. Sophie started crying silently beside me, clutching that rabbit. And Ron? He lost it. He lunged forward, slapping the pulpit with both hands so hard the microphone squealed. This is out of context. She was medicated. She didn't mean... His voice cracked into a shout. The pastor ignored him, kept reading every word. You are my peace. Don't let anyone tell you different. Ron's scream tore through the church. She was my wife! He tried to grab the letter from the pastor's hands, but two ushers stepped forward, restraining him. People were whispering now, disgusted, pitying. His mask had slipped in front of everyone, and all I could think was, Mom got the last word. Don't forget to subscribe. When the pastor finished reading Mom's words, the silence in the church felt heavier than any hymn. I swear even the air held still. Sophie was gripping my arm, tears streaking her face, but her expression had this strange calm too, like Mom had finally wrapped her in the hug Ron had been denying us for months. Ron, though? He went nuclear. The ushers had to guide him back down the steps, but he didn't sit. He started pacing, red-faced, veins popping at his neck. She was confused. She didn't know what she was writing. Don't you understand? I was there. I took care of her. His voice cracked into a sob. He slammed his fist against the pew so hard the hymnals fell out and clattered to the floor. People recoiled. A few older women shook their heads. One of Mom's co-workers muttered loud enough for half the row to hear, He's always been controlling. That whisper spread like wildfire. The pastor, steady as ever, folded the letter and said firmly, These were Linda's words. We will honor them. Then he moved right back into the service, reading scripture, smoothing the room like nothing had happened. It was almost surreal, the calm voice up front, while Ron unraveled in the corner like a man possessed. When it ended, people lined up to hug Sophie and me. They avoided Ron like he was contagious. Aunt Carol leaned in and whispered, "She loved you, honey. Don't let him make you doubt that." My cousin pressed my hand and slipped me a tissue, eyes burning. For the first time in months, I didn't feel crazy. Ron tried to rally. He cornered Sophie near the exit, jabbing a finger in her face. "You'll regret this. You and your brother—" She flinched, and I stepped between them, chest to chest with him. My voice came out low and dangerous. "Touch her, and I'll bury you deeper than Mom." That's when the sheriff, who'd been sitting quietly in the back, Mom had treated his wife years ago, walked over and laid a hand on Ron's shoulder. "Time to go home, Ron." The look on Ron's face, humiliation, fury, disbelief, was better than any punch I could have landed. But the aftermath didn't stop at the church doors. That night, Sophie's phone blew up with messages. Half the family telling us we were brave, the other half parroting Ron's story about how we ambushed him. He even went on Facebook, posting some rant about outsiders hijacking a widow's grief. Only problem? Screenshots of the letter started circulating. Someone from church had taken a photo while it was read aloud. Hundreds of likes, comments like, "What a beautiful tribute," and "So glad her kids had her love." Ron's meltdown was public now. His control was cracking, and he knew it. That's when things got scary. Because a man like Ron doesn't fade quietly. He doubles down. And over the next week, he took his grief and weaponized it in ways that crossed lines I never thought he'd cross. Update 2. Okay, so here I am again. Honestly, I wasn't even sure I'd come back after the funeral because part of me thought, that's it. That was the revenge. Story over. But after what's happened this past week, I think I owe you all an update. First off, holy hell. I read through the comments on my last post the night after the funeral, and they were a lifeline. Some of you said things like, "Your mom spoke louder than he ever could," and "You didn't just honor her, you shut him down with the truth." I screenshotted those and sent them to Sophie. She cried again, but this time it wasn't from pain. She said, "Strangers get it more than half our family does." And she's right. Also, whoever commented, "Ron is the kind of guy who cries when Apple discontinues his favorite charger." Thank you for that laugh. I needed it. But here's the thing I didn't expect. People filmed it. Like actual cell phone recordings of Ron's outburst got posted. I've had cousins send me TikToks with captions like, "Widower loses it when wife's final words aren't about him." It's surreal. The internet has now seen Ron pound the pulpit and scream, "She was my wife," while ushers dragged him back. One clip already has 30,000 views. Sophie joked that Mom finally went viral. Not everyone is celebrating, though. Ron's side of the family has been blowing up my phone. I've been called a manipulator, a grief thief, even an actor staging drama. One of his nephews DM'd me, "Hope you rot for embarrassing a man in mourning." I didn't reply. What could I even say? The letter wasn't forged. It wasn't staged. It was Mom's handwriting, her words. And Ron? He hasn't gone quiet. Quite the opposite. 3 days after the funeral, Sophie came home to find her apartment door jimmied open. Nothing stolen, but her drawers were yanked out, clothes dumped on the floor. On the bathroom mirror, someone traced a shaky message in soap. "She was mine." The cops came, but without cameras or witnesses, it's just suspicious circumstances. We know it was him. Meanwhile, he's been leaving voicemails on my phone at 2 a.m. Slurred, half sobbing, half threatening. "You think you won? You don't know what you've done." One of them ended with what sounded like glass breaking. A few people in the comments warned me after update 1. Men like Ron don't stop when you beat them in public. They escalate. Yeah, you were dead right. So where does that leave us? I'm not backing down. Mom's words already buried his narrative, and every tantrum since has just proved who he really is. But I'll be real. I'm scared. Not just for me, but for Sophie. He's not above making her life hell to get to me. Some of you suggested restraining orders, changing locks, even moving. We're looking into it. But I'll say this. I'm done playing defense. If Ron wants to drag this out, I'm going to make sure the next chapter is one he can't come back from. And when that happens, I'll be back here again. After update 2, I thought maybe venting would bleed off some of the poison. It didn't. If anything, Ron doubled down like a man who'd lost his stage and was desperate for another spotlight. 3 nights after the funeral, I woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of pounding. Not a knock, pounding. I grabbed a bat from beside the bed and crept to the door. There was no one there, but when I stepped outside, my stomach dropped. My mailbox was ripped out of the ground, lying crumpled like a soda can in the middle of the driveway. Spray painted across the side of my garage, in jagged red letters, were the words, "Thief of Love." Sophie came over the next morning, pale, holding her phone. "He's posting about us," she said. Sure enough, Ron had been writing Facebook novels at 2 a.m., claiming Mom's kids stole her last days from him, that we were parasites feeding on his grief. He tagged family members, old church friends, even Mom's co-workers. The comment section was split, half sympathy, half people calling him out after seeing the video. But then came the part that snapped something in me. Sophie walked into her apartment that afternoon and found her rabbit, the one she'd carried to the funeral, slid open on her kitchen counter, stuffing spilling out like guts. No forced entry, no broken locks, just a symbol, a warning. She called me screaming, voice shaking so hard I barely understood the words. I drove over, found her sitting on the floor, hugging the empty rabbit like it was a corpse. That was the moment I knew. Ron wasn't just unhinged. He wanted to terrorize us. The cops? They took a report, said without witnesses or fingerprints, it was circumstantial. One officer even muttered, "Grief makes people act out." I wanted to shake him and scream, "This isn't grief, this is war." So I stopped waiting for help. I started digging. Ron loved to posture about being the caretaker, but his finances were a mess. Mom once hinted he had debts, and now I went looking. Sophie remembered where he kept his mail, stuffed in the drawer of the desk Mom used to write letters at. With her gone, no one was tidying up for him anymore. We slipped in one afternoon when he was at work. The drawer was a goldmine, overdue mortgage notices, maxed out credit card statements, a hospital bill and collections. He wasn't some noble caregiver. He was drowning, and Mom's illness had been his excuse to play martyr while she quietly paid off his disasters. But the jewel? A draft of the very speech he'd tried to give at the funeral. I'll never forget the headline scrawled at the top in his blocky handwriting, "Her greatest love was me." The speech didn't mention Sophie or me once. It was 3 pages of him painting himself as a saint. I folded that draft carefully, slid it into my jacket pocket next to Mom's letter. A perfect contrast. Revenge, I realized, wasn't just about shutting him down at the funeral. That was just the start. He wanted to be remembered as the grieving husband, the sole caretaker. But I was going to burn that illusion to ash, publicly, irrevocably. And I knew exactly how. I didn't sleep the night after Sophie found her rabbit gutted. I sat at my kitchen table with Ron's speech draft spread out next to Mom's letter, staring at the grotesque contrast. His self-worship versus her simple gratitude. His handwriting was manic, underlined words like sacrifice and devotion, but not a single mention of her children. Not even Sophie, who had spent nights curled at the foot of Mom's bed as a kid when thunderstorms scared her. We didn't exist in his world. That's when I knew. I wasn't going to let his version be the last word in this town. Mom's hospital had been planning a memorial fundraiser in her honor, an annual tradition where they spotlight a staff member who'd passed. She'd been a nurse for 30 years. They wanted to share her story. I volunteered to speak. Ron tried to insert himself, of course, but the committee, having seen his funeral meltdown circulate on TikTok, politely ran out of slots. That's when my plan clicked into place. The night of the event, Sophie and I sat in the front row of the auditorium, the shoebox of Mom's keepsakes on my lap. The crowd was filled with hospital staff, neighbors, even some of Ron's extended family. He slouched in the back, face pale and eyes darting, like he knew something was coming. When it was my turn, I walked to the podium and held up Mom's letter. "My mother," I began, voice shaking, "wasn't a saint. And she didn't ask to be remembered as one. She was human, she was messy, but she was love. Then I read her words aloud, letting them hang in the air just like at the funeral. Thank you, my child, for being by my side until the end. Murmurs rippled through the room. I could see heads nodding, hands dabbing eyes. Then, slowly, I unfolded Ron's draft. And because honesty matters, I want to show you the tribute that almost replaced her voice. I held up the pages. This is what Ron planned to read at her funeral. I read it. Every self-congratulatory line, every omission. I didn't embellish or mock. I just let his words rot under the light of the microphone. By the time I reached "Her greatest love was me," the audience was dead silent, the kind of silence that feels like judgment. Ron shot up from the back, face blotchy, veins straining. You had no right, he bellowed. That was private. That was mine. His voice cracked, and he stumbled forward, nearly tripping on the stairs. Security moved toward him, but he waved his arms wildly. She was my wife, damn it! And then he started sobbing. Not soft grief, but ugly, heaving sobs, fists pounding the wall as his voice broke into nonsense. Gasps echoed around the room. Some people turned away. Others stared openly, like they were watching a man unravel in real time. I folded both letters back into the shoebox and said, steady. One was her truth. The other was his fantasy. You can decide which one deserves to be remembered. The applause was soft at first, then grew, rising like a wave. Sophie buried her face in her hands, crying. But this time it was relief. Ron stormed out, his sobs echoing down the hall. He hasn't shown his face since. His Facebook is deactivated. His truck hasn't been parked outside the house in days. Rumor is, creditors are closing in. For the first time in months, the silence feels clean. Mom's letter is framed now, hanging in my living room. Every time I walk past it, I swear I hear her voice. Don't let anyone tell you different. And I won't.